Thank you, Chairman Geren. I first do want to thank you for listening to some of our concerns and addressing some of them in the bill. But having said that, I'd like to go through some of the provisions that I think are problematic. First, let's start with your premise under the bill, as you stated, is to go after bad people.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
I think President Trump said bad hombres, so you all are kind of speaking the same language there, I guess.
No, sir. If they're a bad person, whether a male or a female, I'm not going to address just the males.
That's true. You're not discriminating. Now, first off, is there even a legal definition for a sanctuary city?
No, sir, there's not.
Okay. Can you name one sanctuary city in Texas?
At this time, I cannot. Earlier in the session, I would have said that Travis County was.
Okay. And I appreciate your concern about Travis County, but in fact, that has been corrected, and the sheriff has been cooperating with ICE.
She currently is, yes.
Okay. In fact, the commander of the region that governs Texas has told you and us that everyone is cooperating with the federal government in Texas, and he knows of no city, county, constable, sheriff, police chief that is not cooperating.
That is correct.
All right. Now, the vast majority of law enforcement from around the state, except for one sheriff, testified that this bill was unnecessary and that they were already cooperating. If that's the case, why do we need this bill?
Because some people, and I will again use Travis County Sheriff, chose not to honor ICE detainers, and if it's the law, then they'll have to. It'll not be optional for them.
Okay. You've added college campuses and campus police. So it's true that both public and private college campuses are covered, and that campus police will have to do the same things you're asking of our sheriffs and police around the state?
The bill says that the campuses cannot have a policy against their police department inquiring about immigration status, and so it allows them to.
Can you name a university that is currently violating this policy?
No, sir, I cannot.
Okay. So we don't have a county, we don't have a city, and we don't have a university. Let me talk to you about, and I think you'll appreciate this as a former United States Marshal.
Deputy.
You would agree, okay, deputy. You would agree that local law enforcement is not trained in immigration law?
I would agree with that, yes, sir.
In fact, they do not know about the 165 different types of visas that are out there.
That is probably correct.
And they do not know the difference between an investor's visa, a student visa, or anything like that.
That is probably correct, sir.
So tell me how you think they're going to be able to enforce immigration law when they have no skills or training whatsoever in knowing when someone is here legally or not.
Well, as you know, Mr. Oliveira, there's some of the sheriff's departments that have trained deputies because of the 287G program, but I believe that any police officer commissioned in the state of Texas has a common sense to look at a document and determine if that person is there legally. But the questioning, they're just going to try to determine the status. The actual, once the person is booked into the jail is when the fingerprints go to ICE, and that's when the detainer is issued. There's nothing in this bill that says they can be arrested for being in the country illegally.
But the fact of the matter is your bill allows them to be arrested for crimes or offenses like Class C misdemeanors. Isn't that correct?
That's current law.
Okay. So when you talk about bad people, tell me why somebody violating a traffic signal, not having their car registration.
It's my understanding that if you run a red light or you don't have your car registered, they don't take you to jail for that. When you go to jail, that's when you're fingerprinted.
Well, let me tell you that the United States Supreme Court disagrees with you. In the case of Atwater they said several years ago that a Texas woman could be arrested.
They can be, yes. I didn't say they couldn't be. I said that's not the typical thing.
So even though it may not be a practice, people who commit very minor offenses, like traffic citations, can be arrested.
They can
and
be, yes.
Therefore, they will be checked, and they could be subject to then deportation.
They could be subject to a detainer where the state does not deport, and there's nothing in this bill about deportation. That's left solely up to the federal government. After the detainer request is honored and that person is picked up by the feds will determine whether that person should be deported or not. The state does not deport.
All right. I want to talk a moment about the individual rights of all Texans.
Yes, sir.
Are you aware that ICE detainers have been issued for United States citizens?
Yes, sir, I am.
So when that abuse occurs, even if it's over a Class C misdemeanor, it's going to be okay with you.
No, sir, it's not. If that person can prove that they are a United States citizen or in the country legally, the bill provides for them to be released if they're not being held for some other charges. The ICE detainer does not have to be honored for someone who is in this country legally.
So how does a local deputy sheriff or police officer who's maybe only been to the academy for 6 months, knows nothing about immigration law, make that determination?
Well, the first determination is if you have a Texas driver's license or a Texas ID, you must be a citizen of the United States to acquire those.
Okay, let's talk about that. We've already heard from 3 different federal judges that the voter ID law was unconstitutional and intentionally discriminated against minorities. So you want to rely on a driver's license where it's already been shown in court and proven that many people do not have a driver's license.
That is correct, it has been, but I'm just using the driver's license or a Texas ID as an example, sir. There are obviously other ways of proving you're in this country legally.
Okay. What if you just don't have your papers that day?
Then I guess you'd have to figure out some other.
And if you speak Spanish and you're pulled over and you can't address the officer in English and he says, "You don't have papers? I'm sorry, I'm taking you in."
There's nothing in this bill that says they can be arrested for their for being in the country unlawfully.
Let's go to
they have to be arrested.
Let's go to the scenario where it's again a Class C misdemeanor. You can be arrested for jaywalking.
That's
you
correct.
can be arrested for disorderly conduct. You can be arrested for small traffic offenses like we've already ascertained. But if you don't have your documents, you're going to sit in jail because ICE sends a detainer that in fact is not even a warrant.
You could sit in jail for up to 48 hours. That is correct.
And I guess I'm wondering where my friends are who are concerned about the heavy hand of government, why they're not opposing this, knowing that United States citizens, resident aliens, and others could be arrested.
Well, they could be, if they could be detained for the offense, they're going to be detained for some other offense. They may just get to stay in jail a little bit longer.
Have you ever stayed in jail?
Yes, sir, I have.
Okay. I won't ask you for what. But given that, you know what a horrible experience it is, and we're going to have people who commit minor offenses, some of them being citizens, but because nobody knows, it happens in the middle of the night, they're going to be detained, jailed, until they can clear their name. So they're guilty without a process, without a warrant, without anything that's really shown probable cause.
For no longer than they could normally be detained.
Okay. All right. Is there any procedure that you put in place in this bill for challenging an immigration detainer?
No, sir, there's not.
Okay. So then people are going to have to hire attorneys, maybe go for a writ of habeas corpus, and spend lots of money when they may be totally and absolutely innocent of being here without documents or being here illegally.
That's under a federal civil process. It's not addressed in this bill. And to clarify, when I worked for the Marshal Service, I was in a lot of jails and for a lot of time.
I was assuming that's what it was.
Not as a guest.
All right. When you've seen detainer documents, and you know that they're not covered with any evidence like you would normally see in a probable cause warrant. Usually there's a statement or a document or some evidence indicating what you're guilty of.
This is under federal civil process, it's under federal law, and all we're doing is requiring our police to cooperate with them,
I understand
to help them
that.
enforce that.
But I'm talking about once that detainer is issued, and once you're stuck in jail, and once you're facing deportation.
There's nothing in this bill
Mr. Oliveira moves that
causes
the gentleman's time be extended. It's so ordered.
that causes you to be deported.
Whatever due process
Thank you, Mr.
rights
Speaker.
that person has, they still will have.
So you're not concerned at all that Texas jails are going to be forced to hold people without a warrant?
No, sir, I'm not, because all due process rights that these people have are still in effect.
How are they in effect if you've been wrongfully detained?
You could be lawful. It could be lawful. It's under the federal process. If they issue a detainer request, all we're saying is we hold them long enough for them to be checked on. And typically, according to ICE and the same ICE agents that you met with, these people are in jail no longer than 12 hours before ICE picks them up. They said under no circumstances it longer than 24, but typically it's within 12 hours anywhere in the state.
In fact, several years ago, we worked together and coordinated a trip to Brownsville, Texas, so you could see how the system worked.
We did, and it was very informative.
And you were satisfied that at that time that police departments and others were honoring these federal requests.
I'm still satisfied that most of them are. What this will do is prevent things from like happened in Travis County earlier this year from happening again.
I want to talk about the chilling effect of your bill. And we discussed this in committee. You know now, and there have been reports and studies, even just from the last couple of months, that the immigrant community that historically has cooperated with law enforcement is no longer cooperating with law enforcement. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware that they're no longer, and one of the reasons at your request we put some protections in here for witnesses and for victims.
I appreciate that. But the chilling effect of your bill, the words out there right now in all these communities, they don't know about that language. They're not going to know about that language, and they're not going to cooperate with law enforcement when there's a murder, when there's a drug deal, when there's a rape, when there's a sexual assault, or any of these things, for fear of deportation.
I disagree with you, and I think that this is about public safety, and I would disagree that they wouldn't cooperate. I understand the chilling effect of some of the ICE enforcement. This is not ICE enforcement. This is when someone is arrested. This bill
but you're asking them to enforce federal immigration law.
I'm asking them to enforce federal immigration law when requested.
Now, you talk about making our communities safer, but if people are not cooperating with the authorities, are not going to come forward and be eyewitnesses, despite the language that you did put in the bill, I do give you credit for that.
Well, I appreciate getting credit for something today.
Yeah, you're welcome. But are you aware of the studies that show, multiple studies that show immigrants are less likely to commit crimes versus U.S. citizens?
No, sir, I'm not. No one has brought any of those studies to me.
Okay. Well, I'll be glad to share them with you throughout the day because they're all crystal clear that the immigrant community is not this lawless community.
I would agree that most of the community is not a lawless community, and that's why we are going after the ones that are criminals.
Yeah, somebody that gets a speeding ticket. How do you think it's going to make our, well, let me tell you, at least in South Texas, and I think throughout the state, based on the testimony we heard, there was only one law enforcement officer, and he testified in the Senate as a sheriff in favor of this bill. Isn't it true?
Correct.
There was not one police chief, one police officer, one constable, one sheriff, or anybody else that testified in favor of this bill?
That's correct.
So isn't it fair to say that their concern is we want to focus on going after real criminals, protecting the streets, and not having to arrest and detain people on Class C misdemeanors?
There's nothing in here that says they have to arrest or detain someone who's committed a Class C misdemeanor.
Okay,
nothing.
But Chairman Geren, if you put a provision in there that a police chief or a sheriff can lose his credentials and no longer be in law enforcement, what do you think is going to happen out there?
I believe that they're going to honor the detainers as they currently are today, and therefore they will have no problem.
Yeah.
There you go. That's a great answer.
Let me ask you about what happens after the 24 or 48 hours. What do you think is going to happen?
I think that if they're eligible to get out of jail, they're going to get out of jail.
Okay. So you think it's going to be easy for these police chiefs and sheriffs, wondering if they're going to lose their job, particularly when they now know the state is granting them immunity and paying for their failures if they wrongfully detain somebody. You think that nobody's going to be kept over the 48 hours? Because that's happening now.
I don't know if it's happening now or not, but if it is, then I think that these people have a right to get out of jail when that 48 hours is up, and I think they should be released at that time if ICE has not come and picked them up or gotten a warrant to make where they're held longer. Right. And a warrant is available to ICE where they can keep these people incarcerated for I don't know for what length of time.
You're familiar with the concept of racial profiling?
Yes, sir, I am.
And you know there's been many cases of that in Texas and other states.
That's what I've been told, yes, sir.
Okay. Isn't it true that if police officers are not trained in this, that what is going to happen is that somebody who speaks Spanish, has brown skin, is more likely than some blue-eyed, blonde Canadian, for example, more likely that they're going to be arrested and detained versus the blue-eyed, blonde-haired Canadian?
There's no evidence of that I've seen, Mr. Oliveira. And if you
well, you just agreed with me there's racial profiling.
I agree with you that racial profiling does occur, not just in law enforcement. And it's not just against Hispanics.
This is not intended to increase. This doesn't address that issue. This is just
In regards to the question was asked earlier, and I think the data will show, but well over, as I understand it, about 1,100, 1,200 people testified against this bill, and I think there was no more than 10 or 11 that testified in favor.
I think that if you're including both houses, the Senate and the House, that number might be correct.
Okay, and I am. Thank you for pointing that out. Have you ever seen a bill with so much opposition, with such overwhelming opposition, pass?
Yes, sir, I have. I've carried some.
Okay. Tell me one of them.
Well, let's see. The one I carried last year that prohibited the counties from suing environmental enforcement when the enforcement was already, when the sites were already being cleaned up. There was, I think, one witness for, and all the rest were against it.
Okay. How many came out against it?
I don't know the number. It wasn't this many, but it was a large number.
Because the only two bills I'm aware of are House Bill 2 that dealt with taking away women's rights and abortion, which was found to be unconstitutional, and the other bill was voter ID, which we have found 3 different courts now have said it discriminated against minorities on a racial basis.
Okay.
So given that, don't you expect significant court challenges?
I would expect that a lot of what you're doing right now is trying to set one up, so I guess yes.
No, what I'm trying to do is show what a lousy bill you have.
Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome. No, what I'm trying to show, Chairman Geren, and with respect to you, is that this bill is going to result in racial profiling. It's going to result in massive deportation. It's going to result and breaking apart families.
This, once again, Mr. Oliveira, this bill has nothing to do with deportation. That is a federal issue. The state does not do that.
But we're going to hold people even though an immigration judge might say they have the right to stay.
That's correct. We're going to hold them for up to 48 hours and typically less than 12.
Mr. Geren, I hope we can improve your bill today because, respectfully, sir, it doesn't have anything really to do with letting criminals out on the streets. It has to do with somebody's political agenda. And in that sense, I'm extremely disappointed. And this is a dark day for the Texas House of Representatives.
Thank you for your questions, Mr. Oliveira.